really good, thank you. You?
Great.
So I think a good way for us to start it is talking about how we met. So how long have we known each other for now?
So I think that we met in 2020 in September, maybe.
I think
Did it
it's
start? Did
wasn't it
our
to
course
20
start
no
3 years?
2021
No?
2021.
2021. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So and we met
So we
for
met at the
the
Western
co
Galilee College
and the course is
in
called
the
the
Innovation and
Innovation and on.
Entrepreneurship in Holocaust Memory,
So
led by.
how did you come to? Did you express interest in that course? How did you come to be on the course in the first place?
So, in the paper where I am the editor in chief, we advertised this course, and because
Right.
one Hungarian guy called our attention to it, and then he sent us the link, and then we translated into Hungarian. I saw that it didn't get a lot of likes as a Facebook post, and not a lot of people read it, but I thought that it's the most interesting course in the universe, and I really needed it because I had this project. I
Yeah.
wanted to do something with the topic of the Hungarian youth resistance movement in 44, and then I said that it's just a dream coming true, and then I met you there. That was another
So
dream coming true.
before before
Because I
we
met
move on
someone who's a
to
hardworking person.
before we move on to the resistance movement, so you've got quite a lot of experience, and you've got personal connections to the Holocaust, but you've worked with March of the Living. You've you've done academic things on the Holocaust as well. What's your background in
No.
Holocaust education?
So I was the leader of the volunteers in the Hungarian March of the Living in Budapest. And then when I moved to Israel in 2012, I stayed in contact with the March of the Living, the international organization. So I'm volunteering here now in Israel for March of the Living. So at March of the Living, I was in the latest years. I was working with other volunteers who would tour guide in Auschwitz, who would tour guide in the very unique rail car exhibition in Hungary, and so I was an unofficial um, supervisor, kind of somebody, and
So
then I finished that. So I don't have any academic papers. I only have uh, MAs.
so
My
how
first one is Slovak and English, and my second is journalism, and the third one is Jewish history. So that's the
so how many
closest to
times
the
have
Holocaust.
you actually how many times have you personally been on March of the Living?
So how many times that I can't tell, but that I know because I am counting the days, how many days I was in Auschwitz. So that's I'm at 23. Uh, and
Wow.
I'm always saying that I'm competing with my grandmother who was there for 2 months, and she was in the Mexico barrack and she survived, and then that's how I could be born.
Wow. So you've been there, you've been to Auschwitz, Auschwitz Birkenau 23 times.
Yes, yes, and then in the March of the Living, we always have a Hungarian commemoration in front of the Hungarian Barak. We have a huge Hungarian flag and an Israeli flag that we carry, and um before we always have Jewish schools and non-Jewish schools. The participants are very different from the participants of March of the Living elsewhere in the world, because usually they are students who are prepared for this trip for the whole year. And then they don't only go for the Holocaust Memorial Day to Auschwitz, but before that they would visit other camps in Poland. And then after the Holocaust Memorial Day, they would come to Israel and spend 1 week here. And for the Independence Day, which is 1 week after the Holocaust Day, there is another March of the Living in Jerusalem. So I'm usually
Yeah.
joining that as well. But the
So you've
Hungarian
been
group
20.
doesn't really come to Israel, and it's a very different organization.
So you've been 23 times to Auschwitz. Does it does it feel any different because you've been back there so many times? Do you still get that feeling when you enter into Auschwitz, knowing what happened there, especially towards Hungarian Jews? And obviously you've got family connection. One of you, was it your grandmother was actually in Auschwitz? Does it have less of an emotional impact because you've been so many times, or do you still get that feeling of just horror every time you go in there?
Yes, so there is the feeling is always the same. This is why I'm always because it's so heavy, it's so harsh, the feeling what you get there anyway, that I'm always suggesting to people to go for the March of the Living, because then there's like 10,000 people around with Israeli flags and with not only Jews celebrating life. That's why it's called March of the Living, celebrating the living instead of the death marches, you know. So it's a very heavy experience or every time, but somehow it melts it a little bit that there are other people who are feeling the same as you.
Yeah, so obviously this is a really good advertisement for March of the Living because I think March of the Living's amazing as well. The first time I went, I met a Holocaust survivor at the school that I was working in. And the first time I ever heard March of the Living mentioned, he's called Arek Hirsch. He's a Leeds-based Holocaust survivor, and he was in Auschwitz for a while. And he said he came to speak at my school, and I had been with one of my friends. I'd been to Theresienstadt, Terezin in the Czech Republic, just on holiday, like because if you're interested in Holocaust education,
Very
like I
nice
am.
holiday, Johnny.
Well, it was we had fun in Prague, and then we went to Theresienstadt on the last
And
day. But
then
he was kind
directly to Terezin.
yeah.
Mhm.
So he was kind of impressed that I'd spent my free time going to Terezin, and he was there for a while as well. So he said, "Have you ever heard of March of the Living?" And at this point, I've never heard of it ever. And he said, "Well, maybe you can come with me and the group that are going." So at that point, I still didn't know what March of the Living was, and so I rang the organizer of the British group that attends March of the Living, and it just so happened that there was a place spare for me, so I ended up going with him. And it's amazing for people that don't know what March of the Living is. You It depends. There's many different programs that you can go on depending on how it's organized and how long you're going to stay for. But the first time I went, you go and you spend about a week in Poland, and you go to places. We started off in Warsaw, so you go to the Warsaw ghetto, and then you tour around Poland. You go to the different extermination centers um, with a world class educator who's leading the group, and then most of the people that go on it are Jewish. I think everybody else on my in my group was Jewish. And then it ends in Auschwitz, and you go to Auschwitz one, which was kind of the penal colony, which did have a gas chamber, but it's not as well known as Auschwitz two, because there you've got those two really, but four massive gas chambers in Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is where the overwhelming majority.
Maybe Auschwitz one is known about the Appelplatz more. You know,
So
like
is that
they
the where they would do the roll call?
yeah.
Yeah,
But
and
that's
then there's
not the place.
obviously
That's not where the selection was, where Mengele was standing, where the trains arrived. That's Auschwitz too. Yes, and
yeah.
then there is the late.
Um,
Hmm.
and you see, yeah, you start in Auschwitz one, And it's really strange to be there on that day because you're in Auschwitz 1, and there's a very celebratory mood. People, obviously it's about life, isn't it, and enjoyment and kind of reclaiming that space. And there's about 10,000 people. When I went, I can't remember how many different nationalities there were there, but there's dozens of different
It's
nationalities, aren't
usually
there?
it's 53 countries.
Wow. So I went that first time with Eric Kirsch, and then when I was working in Japan, I just had an idea. Me and two of my colleagues, who are two of my best friends, had this idea, like, why don't we try and take a group of Japanese kids there? And because it was a private school and they had the money there, we were able to organize it quite quickly. And like 5 months after having the idea, we were
That's
we were there
amazing.
in
Which year
Auschwitz.
was this?
2019.
Okay.
It was so what I planned to do was what the plan was to go to Poland and then go to Israel afterwards, because I really wanted the Japanese kids to see Israel because it's the most interesting place I've ever been in my entire life. And that was the plan. And then the chairman of this school where we worked, who, it's a private school, so he's like mayor of the town. It's called Ota in Japan. Quite an unpleasant character, not a nice guy whatsoever, probably like a right-wing Japanese politician. So he just finds out that we're going to Israel, and he's got like some prejudice against Israel. He thinks it's going to be too dangerous for the kids. So he just said, no, under no circumstances are they allowed to go to Israel. And I said, well, can I talk to him about it? Because the same school had allowed school trips to places in Africa before. So it didn't make sense. Like, as if going to Israel on this highly organized school trip with many, many different nationalities from all around the world, going to, like, and he's let students go to Africa before. So it's like, it doesn't, but in Japan, I mean, yeah, you have this, you hear about Israel, and then the first thing you think is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So he decided it was too dangerous. So what we did is, that was really disappointing, but instead, March of the Living, the person that I was working with, was really good. We went to Germany first and then went to Poland. So we had a week in Germany and then a week in Poland. But like, if anyone's listening or watching and they've never been on March of the Living and they've got a chance, or you've got students, no matter where you are in the world, as a teacher, do try and organise your students that trip, because the value for money was amazing as well, for what you get as a cohort that arrives there. So we both have kind of that connection to March of the Living. And you mentioned your grandmother was in Auschwitz for a while. So I think you've got more family connections. You mentioned your uncle before as well. And so what are your family connections to the Holocaust?
So all my grandparents, so for example, and my great-grandparents, my father as well. So my mom is the second generation in our family. My father was a first generation Holocaust survivor. He was 2 years old in 1944 when the Germans entered Hungary. And his father was taken to labor camp at the Don, and in 1942, in the winter, he was still there when my father was born, and then he died around in January. So my father was born in December, and then we have his letters, but we don't know whether he knew that my father was born. And my grandma,
that's so tragic.
The mom of my father, she was sort of resistant, but not in the resistance movement. So she had a little baby before that. She was pregnant, but when my father and my great-grandparents got into the ghetto of Budapest, the big ghetto, because until then they were in a protected house, in a street called Klausal, and not the street, the square, sorry. And so my grandma, she smuggled out my father, the 2-year-old baby,
Wow.
from the ghetto when the guard went somewhere in the pram, and then in the same pram she smuggled out my two great grandparents as well, so the whole family. And but she was also standing in line in the Vadas street at the glass house, the so-called glass house, which was like a kind of an internment camp in Budapest. And in front of the glass house, there was always a big line queuing for uh, for forged documents, for counterfeited documents, and then but when she was queuing there, then the razzia came, so she had to uh, hide in a shop uh, of uh, which sold gloves and umbrellas. And then that lady actually who owned that shop, she was the she saved my grandma by that she hid her there, and not only that time but later as well. And that's a very interesting story that my grandma never gave out the name of this lady because that lady didn't want. She could have been a righteous among the nations, and but she's in our memory like that she's the one who saved my grandma, and we don't know anything about her. And maybe we could somehow research that, but we never got to that at this point. And from the other side, from my mom's side, my grandma was so that part is not from Budapest but from Czechoslovakia, from a town called Shala, where I was born as well. And my grandma was taken away, deported to Auschwitz, and then in Birkenau, so in Auschwitz too, she was in the Mexico barrack. Her cousin was in the Canada barrack, the Canada Commando. And in the Canada Commando, there was all those people who were the most lively, most healthy people, who were the smartest in the eyes of the Nazis. And then they were distributing the food. They were taking apart the coats and taking out the gold from the coats, what was sewn into them. And then, so this cousin of my grandma, she smuggled potato to my grandma and to her sisters, which they could trade into a needle, and then that helped them surviving there. My grandfather, so my mom's father, he was in Bergen-Belsen. We know every detail about him because the Bergen-Belsen archives are digitalized, and my uncle, who is the brother of my mom, he lives in Germany, and he got a lot of information from them. So from Bergen, so my grandfather was taken to Bergen-Belsen from Hungary, from Budapest. He was hiding in Budapest until 44.
Wow.
So in a nutshell,
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
grandparents, but my mom never had grandparents because they were killed the first moment of the in the gas chambers.
Yeah, I'm surprised I've never asked you or heard this story before because we've been working on the Holocaust in Hungary for about a year and a half now, haven't we?
Oh yeah, but Johnny, do you think that it's because of that we have such an important topic that is more important than us? It's greater than
Yeah,
us, and it's
exactly.
why we are working on it is because of that it's not in the common knowledge, and actually we know why it's not in the common knowledge. There are a lot of
Yes.
explanations for that, and actually this paper what Asher Cohen wrote, it is also not only his paper but his book as well, the resistance, the Haluc resistance in Hungary from 42 to 44, it's criticized a lot. It's everywhere.
Yes.
It's appreciated that he wrote it, but that he wrote these things, but very much criticized that everything is based on testimonies. But how is history written if not from testimonies? Tell me, you're the
Yeah,
historian.
well, it's cross referenced quite well. I think,
Mm-hmm.
if you've got many testimonies, and they're all saying the same thing, and it's not just he's used one type of witness or one type of testimony, he's cross-referencing many different types of witnesses. And yeah, history, the reason that we know how things what happened 1,000 years ago is from chroniclers and people that left testimonies. We would know very little about history, about anything that's happened before, if we didn't rely to a certain extent on testimonies. And it's not it's backed up by other evidence as well. It's he uses testimonies, but this matches the other evidence, because this period of history was not that long ago. So we have photographs, we have perpetrator documents, we have all these different kinds of testimony that back up what he's saying. And just before we get into his article proper, so just to go back to when we met on the course for innovation and entrepreneurship in Holocaust education. So it was kind of by chance that we came to be working together, because I'd met somebody, they were doing these coffee morning things, and I met somebody on one of those. You had to have like a virtual coffee with somebody. And then what we had to do, just for our audience, is we had to kind of pitch an idea and then splinter off into groups of about 4. I think the maximum was 4. So my idea, because my specialism, the reason that I'm on the course in the first place is because I'm interested in Holocaust education as a teacher and a student, and I'm doing a PhD in Holocaust studies. So that's why I don't remember signing up for the course. I just got an email saying someone called Dr. Boaz Cohen wanted to speak with me. So I was like, I can't remember signing up, but I was just like, okay, that sounds interesting. I'll
You
speak
don't
to, I
remember
just don't
signing
know
up?
what,
I never knew that.
no, I don't know if they got my information or I signed up for it. So it was just by chance. I was just like, okay, I'll speak to him. But then I pitched my ideas, which is about my specialism, which is Holocaust perpetrators. And nobody seemed to like that. So I had to choose someone else's idea. And this other participant, who I won't name because I haven't asked his permission to use his name, but told me about your story, and said there's somebody who still knows a member of a resistance movement, has been working with this person and is in contact with this person. It's called David Gur, and told me a little bit about this incredible story. And I'd never heard this story about the youth resistance movement in Hungary, and it's a non-violent resistance movement. So as a teacher, I saw that as perfect for like a classroom-based resource. So then yours was the best project by far of any of the others. I looked at the others and I wasn't attracted or enticed by any of them. So I asked you, I said, can I join the course? And you said yes straight away. And then and then you told me more about this incredible story of David Gur. And we decided to make a resource package. So which we have, and we had published with the kind help of Dr. Boaz Cohen and the other course instructor, who's Dr. Edna Pasha from Israeli Smart Cities. So we've got a resource package now. We're having a website made, and then this podcast is kind of the latest thing that we're doing. But because this story, we still have David Gur with us as well, and he's a member of our project. We view him as much of a member of the project as anyone else. It's really me, you, David Gur, Edna, and Boaz, and that's really our team. But this story about David Gur, let's just can you just describe a little bit about who David Gur is and what he did during World War II?
So I met David Gur at an interview first. I heard about him a lot uh, since I was working in March of the Living in Hungary, and he's one of the few survivors of the youth resistance, the Zionist youth resistance movement of Hungary from 44. So he was an underground activist. Now, I met him because I wanted to make an interview with him, which is also a video interview. So, with one of my friends, Daniel Beran, he was the cameraman. We made an interview with him, and we published it in a Hungarian website, which is not a website in the opposition, so to say. So I considered it very, very important that nowadays in the Hungarian media, there are some opposition websites, news sites, which are read by those people who might know this story already. So I wanted those to read it or to watch it who don't know about this story. And David Gur lives here very close to in Tel Aviv. Ramat Gan is the name of the place where he lives. It's in Ramat Gan, which is a suburb connecting city to Tel Aviv. He's 97 years old. And
Is he 97
he's in
now?
superb shape. Yes, because he was born in 1926 in Oka in Hungary, which is in the southeastern Hungary, and then in 38, when the Hungarian regime began to implement the anti-Jewish laws, David's father lost his business license and the family's economic situation worsened. So that's when he was already thinking about, so 12 years old, when he started thinking about the Zionist idea that he wanted to move to Palestine and work the land. And then he moved to Budapest. He left Okain, and then
Just before we move on from that, I think, can we give a little bit of context to what was happening in 1938 in Hungary? Because